Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Korra comic review. This is going to be my full spoiler review for the first Legend of Korra one-shot solo comic, The Mystery of Penquan Island. So finally, after a very long sequence of problems, delays and stuff, the book is finally out. March 4th/5th is the release date for this book. So again, March 4th is going to be your digital and bookstore release everywhere basically. And the 5th is specifically for comic book stores because comics always come out on Wednesdays in comic stores, of course. So yes, it has been a long time. And I think the main thing to say about this book outside of just reviewing it is just that about time. It's been so long since the last Korra comic, because obviously the last main one actually was kind of Patterns in Time, November 2022, but that's like a short story collection and not all of it was new, and like, you know, they're short stories, even shorter than a one-shot comic. Before that, you had to go all the way back to February 2020 for the final part of Runes of the Empire, and that's probably the most equivalent thing. So it has been basically over 5 years since the last 72-page comic release for Korra. Very rough time of things. Now, admittedly, it's a sequence of problems, a lot of which we don't necessarily know the full details about. Clearly, Avatar Studios forming caused havoc for comics across the board, including Avatar comics, to the point where on both sides of things we're only just getting back up and running again. This comic, unfortunately, had also, it seems like, a year where not much progress happened on it. I think some art kind of production issues, I don't really know. But realistically, we probably almost should be on probably Korra one-shot comic number 2 or 3 right now, if not for that. So nothing kind of purposeful targeting Korra. It is just that Korra comics have had a bunch of bad luck start to finish. If you go through it all, it's been a bit of a rough patch, but finally we are here. This is the start of a trilogy of Korra one-shot comics. The other ones haven't yet to be announced yet, so we don't know what number 2 is, but like it's coming at some point. So hopefully that's maybe like a Sammy or someone like that. But we have to start here with the first one, and that is the Mako and Bolin kind of focus, but it is definitely a Mako focused comic, The Mystery of Penquan Island, of course. So if you saw my early non-spoiler review, you know my general thoughts on the book. And this video mostly is going to be about getting into the specifics where we can talk about it in a lot of detail. But I'll quickly just relay my more general thoughts so you have a kind of structure to follow in the video in terms of where I'm at with the book. Overall, I think it's a very good one-shot comic. I think it's very clear that Korra comics, when they started this format, learned the same lessons that it took the Avatar one-shot comics a few books to get to. That being, even though you're switching formats to doing these one-shot character-focused comics, they still have to feel important. You can't just throw a character into any random story and expect the book to be super exciting and everyone in the fandom will freak out for it. You have to actually deliver something important. You can't just switch away from what you were doing, 3-part stories that were actually pretty notable, to only kind of 1-part stories that aren't really notable. So straight away, this solves that problem because it's a quite important story for the brothers. Finally addressing the mothers, Naoki's side of the family, the Fire Nation side of their family. We already know the stuff with the Earth Kingdom side of their family with San and his family and Ba Sing Se, of course. Now, what's the deal with this? But also, what happened to the parents? Why were they killed? That actually does get answered in this book, which you might suspect from the description and stuff like that, but it actually does happen here. So it's a pretty big story to tell in a one-shot comic, probably like some of the more important content in that regard. Like, say something like the Suki comic covers her backstory, which is quite important. The Azula comic covers like where she's going next. The upcoming Ashes of the Academy is quite important for May. But this is just very notable, just like major part of a backstory that like was teased in some of the early episodes with Mako and Bolin. Now we finally get ourselves some answers. That's kind of big, kind of notable. But the big question is, how does this book execute on doing all of that? My general thoughts there are that I think the book does a pretty good job. I think Kiku Hughes definitely knows how to write the characters well, and does, I think, a very strong attempt at doing a very ambitious story in this very set format. 72 pages, no room for maneuvering there whatsoever in terms of having more pages or less. The one-shots are always 72 pages. I think you can tell that there was definitely a bit of struggle here with the size of the story compared to the amount of pages that are actually present. And I do think fundamentally the book just suffers a little bit because it just feels like an insurmountable task. You either needed the book to be longer, or you needed this to be a multi-part book and it be like even further expanded out. As is, I think it ends up being a very good but kind of slightly flawed one-shot comic that is on the better end of things, but I don't think is one of the absolute best one-shot comics. I still would probably rate the Azula comic and also Ashes of the Academy, I think, a little bit above this. But it's right there, I think, in that kind of number 3 slot so far. I do think there's some very good stuff here. The art from Alex Monique is absolutely exceptional. So there's no complaints from me there. And even the writing, like I said, I wouldn't really put too much of this on Kiku Hughes because I do think it is a format problem. I think the comics need to be able to do more than just one book. We need to get back to multi-part stories or just have some other way to do things, which seems like it's maybe happening. One of the kind of sneaky partial announcements that went along with the Seven Havens series announcement was in the press release mentioning that Dark Horse apparently do have a mini-series to announce for Avatar at some point. Wasn't detailed any further than that, but mini-series did get mentioned in that press release, and I don't think there is currently anything we know about on the Dark Horse side of things that like fits that bill. So that could be a new format that could allow us to do something quite interesting, and hopefully Korra is eligible to be kind of part of that for sure. So that's kind of my general kind of thoughts on this. Getting into, I suppose, more of the specifics of kind of why I feel that way. Like I said, this is the book that it has to do a bunch of stuff. So the structure of this book is effectively, we start off with some kids coming into the police station. One of their friends, kind of a family friend, has gone missing, and they want to ask the police to investigate what has happened because they're very worried about him. Mako inquires, like, hey, you kids, who's looking after you? Finds out that their parents have been killed, and actually another family friend is kind of their current guardian. Right as Mako begins to get invested in this case and investigate, their guardian, Hisa, comes in and takes the kids away. We find out that she doesn't like cops. She doesn't want them to investigate this, even though it's very clear that the kids are correct. Something kind of bad has happened, but Hisa, for whatever reason, wants to keep the police out of this. Something suspicious is going on, and there's the mention, of course, that, oh, our parents died back on the island where we originally came from, and we kind of recently moved to Republic City. So this gets into the idea of, okay, there's going to be a big investigation building up to going to the island, Penquan Island, of course, which is where Naoki is from, which eventually comes out when the investigation happens. Now, what ends up kind of happening with this is that Mako isn't really meant to be sort of investigating this, especially once it becomes clear that the quote-unquote crimes are happening on a fire island, so it's outside of his jurisdiction. So he's meant to just kind of leave it there. But he gets invested, of course. And this is where Bolin gets on board as well. Again, Bolin is not a cop anymore. He's a presidential aide to Zhu Li. But he tags along for this because, as part of some of the early stuff that the brothers find out, they do find out that there is a bit of a connection potentially to their mother. Like they end up finding a kind of stone. They call it a worry stone. And Bolin recognizes it and then figures out that, oh yeah, our mom gave me one of these years ago before she died. This is also one of them. She said it came from the island that she came from. Something's going on here. So Bolin primarily gets invested in this because it potentially involves their family. Whereas Mako, at least as we go forward, is more invested in this because it's just a case he's interested in. But interestingly, he's invested emotionally in it because he connects to the kids, the kids, the older brother Jian, the younger brother Kibi, and then their sister Ming Ming. He connects to them because they're like the brothers. That family has lost their parents as well, and he wants to help out people in the way that maybe it took a bit longer than expected for them to get help. That sort of idea. So the brothers are both invested in this from slightly different angles, and you can tell that they do both care. But the kind of character arc to a certain degree is that maybe Mako's more invested in this from like, this is the job I have to do perspective, whereas like, you're allowed to just show that you care type thing and connect with that kind of family idea of it as well. So a lot of the early section of the book is the investigation, figuring out that yes, that it's a worry stone, it's from the island, and okay, this is how we can get there, because hey, it is an out of the way eastern fire island, so it's a little bit more isolated. Not many people go there, not many people know about what specifically the island is notable for, and that's part of why a lot of the mystery surrounding it is able to kind of be the case, because one vessel is the only one that really does trade with it, and that's the vessel they have to get on to get to the island. So a lot of that stuff is fine. You can maybe make the argument, I think, when you get to the end of the book, that does the book use up a little bit too much of its early page count, doing what is very clearly just set up to even for the characters to get the information about the island, and then there's like a little bit of a sequence on the ship getting there, where we find out that Hisa and the kids are also going to the island because, as we find out, Hisa and the kids have been threatened. Someone sent them a letter basically saying that the missing person, Haijun, has effectively been kidnapped, and hey, bring the kids back to the island or something will happen to Haijun. So someone wants to bring the people who have left the island back to the island and are threatening people. And you can begin to see how the plot is coming together here at this point. Once she gets to know the brothers a little bit more, and she kind of realizes like Mako is not just a cop, that he is actually here for kind of the right reasons. He does care about the kids and what's going on, and because they have a family connection too, she's more understanding about this. Here we also get sort of what ends up being kind of Bolin's main role in the book, which is that he assumes the role of the kind of the big brother character to Kibi, the younger of the brothers, basically, that Hisa's looking after. Whereas Mako seemingly has the connection more with John, who is the older brother. And you can sort of see the way they're going about doing it here, in that, like, John is, I guess, a bit inspired by Mako. Kibi clearly attaches himself to Bolin. And the big thing they kind of present here as we go forward in the book is that Mako still very much kind of, to a certain degree, is holding on to this idea that he has to be the responsible one. He has to watch over his own little brother, Bolin, because that's the way it's always been. But Bolin, in now being kind of old enough, mature enough to be an older brother to someone else like Kibi, Mako very much sees that I don't need to be that way anymore. I'm allowed to be protective towards my brother, but I don't have to maybe be overbearing about it. And that's the kind of roughly the main kind of conflict of the book that kind of happens here, where when the brothers do have an argument a little bit later on in the book and they kind of split up, Bolin is a bit frustrated that Mako is over focused on the investigation into like the other kids when they have this personal connection, whereas Bolin is more focused on the idea of, well, maybe we can find like our mother's family if there is any of that left. Because it gets to this point where it's not inherently the case most of the way through the book that like Naoki is absolutely locked into what's going on elsewhere. It does like seem to just be the case, like, okay, something's happening on the island, this ends up being the island our mother came from, but they haven't actually connected the dots on the idea of, oh, was what happened to our mother related to this? It ends up being the case, but it takes a while to get there, is the kind of the main kind of point coming out of this. Um, so once they get to the island, this is where we get into like I think the truly interesting stuff, and this is maybe where, from a perhaps pacing point of view, or just using the page count better, maybe they should have devoted more page count to the stuff on the island and not as much setup to get there. But I also would say a lot of the stuff, I don't really think a lot of the setup stuff is like pointless. I think it's very good setup. I do think the book just ultimately needed more page count, which is tricky because of the set format, obviously. So again, I think the writer did their best with this, and it's just a weakness of the current set locked in format that we have, with no real room for maneuvering, which is a bit unfortunate. But anyway, what is the deal with Penquan Island? What's it about? What's the culture like? What we find out effectively is that this is an extremely traditionalist island. It basically has not moved on with the times in the same way that the rest of the Fire Nation and the world to a certain degree has. This is a old Fire Nation Fire Island, effectively ruled over by, he's a sheriff, but he effectively considers himself to be a warlord. He is treating things as if kind of to a certain degree the war is still going on, and borderline much older periods in the Fire Nation, because he has even almost, you would say, stricter rules to a certain degree than some of the wartime Fire Nation rules, where like the big one for the sake of this book ends up being that any kid who ends up being a firebender who is a boy is immediately started training basically to be a quote-unquote sheriff, deputy, a soldier. If you are a girl and are a firebender, you are not allowed at all to train or utilize your abilities. That seems to be something that the sheriff here, Ponzo, that's his name, that's what he cares about. Super heavy on tradition. He even has the portraits up of Ozai, Azulon, Sozin, Taiso, all up in the background, like the classic ones we all know. And it really gives that impression of like, that's what we're doing here. And it does sort of make sense, because effectively what the sheriff has done is he's made himself a mini world leader, basically. He's not just the leader of a town. He views like his island as, this is true Fire Nation. The actual Fire Nation's lost its way in the new era. This is the actual traditional Fire Nation. We're doing things in the right way. And even, Mako doesn't have jurisdiction there, of course, because he's a Republic City officer, but Ponzo doesn't even attempt to give him any respect. He's like, that little piece of tin, your police badge doesn't mean anything here. And you can immediately see he is a villainous character here who just is unabashedly evil in the ways that he is evil. Like, he does not see any issue in the way he's doing things, and basically doesn't want them snooping around. It's clear he is probably responsible for a lot of this stuff, but where's the proof right now? This is where you can sort of tell, I think, in the book that, like, the page count is running out. They've got to act quickly here, because the brothers at this point, this is where they have their kind of big kind of blow up at each other and go their separate ways. But they only go their separate ways for 2 pages. Now, admittedly, one of those pages is a montage as like Mako goes around investigating, and the implication is that Bolin is doing something similar on his side of the story. But like I said, the blow up is mostly just over. When they come out of this, Mako was highly focused on the investigation. He was asking about Haijun, not about like Naoki and Naoki's history. Whereas Bolin wants Mako to sort of more care about that. But at the same time, Bolin definitely earlier on in the book did see, and he liked that Mako was emotionally invested in this kind of little family unit because of kind of what happened to them. He liked that, but the issue that happens here is, Bolin says, your job isn't who you are. Mako says, yes, it is. It's always been my responsibility to look after people, to look after you. Bolin says, I'm not a little kid anymore, and right now I don't need a protector, I need my brother. And they do go their separate ways because Mako's like, no, I need to do this. Like, I care about this mission. And Bolin goes off to look for any kind of signs of details about their mother. And you can tell Mako's a little bit kind of like, did I handle that in the right way? Focus on the job. It's not the strongest character arc, I think, for sure. Especially because I don't think the book has the time at the end to, I think, bring it all back around full circle to give something, I think, that is a very clear character arc for Mako, which in my mind would have been probably to go back to the police officers. Like, I think you've all seen the preview pages at the very least, where it's basically his fellow police officers insulting him and stuff like that for not wanting to tell stories about all the crazy stuff he's been involved in, being a little bit of a stick in the mud, not having a personality. And I think the fact that they never come back around to that is a little bit of a flaw in the book, because it feels like that is there for kind of character setup reasons, that he is now going to go on a journey and come back more amiable with the rest of the officers, perhaps. But we don't get the chance to do that because the book is so tight on page count. It just has to give everything to just getting through the plot that we actually need to do on, that there's no time for the, you know, this is the correct kind of thematic way to bring the book to a full, absolute conclusion overall. But yeah, from here, basically what happens is that Mako goes asking around. Everyone is quite evasive when it comes to being asked about, like, Naoki and stuff like that. No one wants to talk. Why is that the case? But then, all of a sudden, the geyser erupts. And this is a big thing because, of course, this is the idea of, this is what the island is known for. That I think Penquan, what it means as a word is fountain, basically. And this is what the geyser is. It's effectively a water fountain type thing that they have in the middle, but the geyser. And they basically say, like, we basically tell time by the way that this geyser erupts. And it erupts at the same time every time. Now all of a sudden it's erupted at the wrong time. What's actually gone on here? This is where Panzo comes in with a lot of his officers and is basically like, hey, these two boys, like Mako Bolin, came to the island and look what's happened. Immediately, the peaceful island that we have has been interrupted. They've ruined our geyser here. It's now not working at the same time anymore. They've caused this. Big smoke screen comes up. There's a little bit of a fight. This is where Mako and Bolin are reunited. Bolin has the kids with him, so John, Kibi, and Ming Ming. They immediately kind of join together and get out of there in the covered by all the smoke that kind of has been put up. This is where we get the details of Hisa has been taken. And the kids are, of course, very worried about her. They've gone to Mako and Bolin for help. There's a kind of big reveal that happens at this point in the story that I'm kind of surprised that they don't touch on it a little bit more. Who took her? And Ming Ming says, Grandpa. Who's your grandpa? The sheriff. So Panzo is John, Kibi, and Ming Ming's grandfather. Meaning that this is a pretty big reveal for information from earlier on in the book. Their parents are dead. Their parents wanted the kids to grow up in Republic City. They wanted to leave. So the implication, especially with what we're about to find out in a few pages' time, is that the sheriff had his, because they don't reveal this, I guess, son and daughter-in-law, or daughter and son-in-law, killed to keep people on his island and maintain control in this way. That's how much he doesn't want people to leave and basically go to better places. It's where you again see the idea that the book doesn't have the time to do it. Again, I think the writer does a good job at cramming as much in here as possible, but it just feels like a story that's a little bit too ambitious for the format that you actually have here. Overall. So Mako helps give John some confidence. They're gonna make this happen. He highlights how, you know, John has been helping to keep his siblings together and stuff like that. That's pretty nice. You know, Bolin gets a nice moment with Kibi, of course. And yeah, then we get to see Mako in action. So like they basically cover like, hey, it was in or around here, which is where Hisa was taken. Mako finds all the kind of signs of a struggle and stuff like that. Trail leads down this kind of well and realizes that, oh, actually, underground, there's like a cave system here. I think I know what's going on here. Wait, John, John, tell me, is Hisa a firebender? And this is where the reveal actually comes out about girls aren't supposed to do firebending. Grandpa doesn't like it. But yes, Hisa is a firebender. She keeps it a secret. We aren't supposed to tell people, but she does know how to firebend. Bolin doesn't know what the takeaway is, but Mako connects the dots. The reason the geyser went off early is because Hisa must have used her firebending to sort of trigger it underground to alert everyone, hopefully Mako and Bolin, to the fact that this happened. That sort of idea. So another nice kind of Mako and John moment, as like he basically says, okay, look, you kids stay out of danger, but John, I'm going to need you to keep your siblings safe while this happens. Me and Bolin are going to do this. And again, another Bolin and Kibi moment, which is really nice. He does give him the worry stone as well, which is a very common thing for Bolin to do in this, which again is a nice little kind of connective moment. Mako even praises Bolin on this kind of big brother kind of dynamics here. There's an apology between the two of them here as they properly talk after the earlier argument. They burst in. This is where the big action stuff happens, and we're borderline in wrap up at this point in the book here. The action scenes are pretty nice because Mako and Bolin are such powerful benders compared to your average kind of run-of-the-mill characters, of course. So they get in there, they take out a bunch of the guards. Hisa is freed. Haijun is also freed, so we get to see him for the first time overall. Yes, Hisa did in fact, purposefully make the geyser go off with her firebending. And yeah, now that we have this opportunity, we have Haijun here, who is, as we knew from before, kind of a more elderly man. So he knows what's happened over the years on the island. He is going to be the one to relay information to us about, like, Naoki and all this sort of stuff, that sort of thing. He reveals he, over the last bunch of years, has been helping people to get off the island and get to Republic City. That's why he lives in Republic City, so he has a kind of staging ground there and can get people from his kind of home place to Republic City as easy as possible. And a lot of these connections explain kind of like why everyone sort of knows each other. Like he's took over the kind of guardianship of John, Kibi, and Ming Ming, even though she's just a family friend. She's not actually related to that family. She was the one who ultimately took them to the city, with the idea, I guess, being that I'm guessing Hisa knew the kids' parents is probably ultimately the idea here. So yeah, that's the big reveal. Haijun points out that the island basically is a bit of a prison with how restrictive everyone else is. He points out that yes, the sheriff views himself as the last true fire warlord, the faithful keeper of traditional Fire Nation culture. I always hated to see him and his men forcing our boys to fight for them and denying our girls the chance to hone their skills. So he says, decades ago, I started smuggling people off the island on his fishing boat, and he's continued to this day. The question then naturally comes up, were you the one who helped get our mother off the island to Republic City? Her name was Naoki. And he's like, yes, of course, I knew you two looked familiar. Bolin has her smile. Mako has her eyes, gets kind of pointed out here. They ask what was she like back then, because she never talked about her life on the island. So we are told about this. There is one piece of new art of Naoki that we get, but ultimately this is just Haijun talking about Naoki to the brothers. Naoki was smart and fierce and brave. She wanted so badly to get off the island and start a new life in Republic City, but I lost touch with her years ago. Is she still there? And the brothers have to say that no, she and her father died when we were young. A firebender killed them in a random mugging. And then you get the big reveal. From off-panel, the phrase is uttered. Are you sure that mugging was so random, as Ponzo enters the kind of cavern here? And the reveal comes out here that, one, Naoki was a firebender, so but also viewed by Ponzo as a troublemaker, because she was always trying to use her firebending even though it was forbidden on the island. He warned her there would be consequences. One day she just vanished. Then, years later, he heard that Naoki had turned up in Republic City, so I got in touch with an old friend who joined up with the Agni Kai triad, told them there was a big reward for whoever took care of her, and that's the explanation. So Ponzo, just out of his want to control the people from his island, basically, just out of basically pure spite, someone who'd already gotten away, he basically just asked an Agni Kai triad guy to, take out this woman. And I guess that ultimately means that San was just like a kind of extra victim in this, that the target was Naoki because of his perceived hatred of her for what happened. It's a very villainous kind of turn for this. It's not exactly kind of what I expected, but it is interesting in that regard. I wish there was more time for this, because ultimately these last 2 or 3 pages in the book is all the Naoki stuff kind of coming out all at once. So there's no build up of like necessarily the brothers' emotions about what's really going on. It's just they find out about the more kind of positive side of their mother, and then here is the truth about what happened. And the art is fantastic here, because once Mako and Bolin hear this, you can see that their expressions go from like kind of like determined to there's anger there. It was you, and the fight begins. But in a way, my problem and my immediate reaction when I read this the first time, and then I took a bit of a break between when I recorded the non-spoiler review, like a few months before I recorded this spoiler review, just a few days before release, is I wish there was more page count, because my initial reaction was just, there's like 10 pages left. This massive reveal has come out, this thing we've kind of all been waiting for, and we have to wrap this up in 10 pages because it's a one-shot comic. They're not going to cliffhang this. It's now or never. And I'm just like, oh, can you do it? Can you do it? They do an okay job. I wish there was more. It's still very good though. But yeah, the big thing here, he taunts Mako constantly throughout this fight. Like, she was one of my citizens. I had a problem with her. I'll deal with it. She got what she deserved. So he kind of fuels Mako's fire throughout the fight. And he gets quite aggressive here. He's not known for being like hyper aggressive when he fights. He's a more intelligent fighter. He does put Ponzo under a lot of pressure here as he attacks forward. It's you get to see Mako be quite expressive and furious here as he comes at him here with big fire punch, big fire kick. He overwhelms him here temporarily. Ponzo then counters with a big fire kick of his own, and it seems like he has the advantage because he's sent Mako flying into a wall here. And he basically points out, you're a menace too, just like your mother was. You're going to meet the same fate as her. He gets hit in the face with a rock, so this distraction from Bolin is just enough to give Mako the chance to kind of get back up, kind of compose himself, and kind of realize that, okay, to a certain degree, they don't overly highlight this, but maybe I don't need to fight with such anger necessarily to a certain degree. He says holding some of the others off because she actually has honed her firebending to be at least a capable fighter. Bolin goes to help her out, leaving once again Mako versus Ponzo 1-on-1. A secondary reveal happens at this point, which is she didn't have to die, If she had just stayed hidden, you wouldn't be a lonely little mongrel orphan. But she couldn't stop herself from helping others. It was her own stubbornness that killed her. And you're like, what? What's going on here? You can sort of connect the dots if you're paying attention. I'll explain it in just a second. But there's some cool stuff that happens here. They fight. You get the fire daggers coming out here. Mako then lands a big fire kick that sends him away. And then the lightning comes out. Beautiful panel here. There's a bunch of different kind of insert panels in it as well. But you see Mako generate pretty powerful lightning here. He doesn't shoot it directly at Ponzo. Instead, he hits it above his head and basically kind of buries Ponzo in rubble. He doesn't kill him, I don't believe. Yeah, no, he's still alive. Yeah, like, I don't know why I thought that. But this wins the fight here. And of course, as such a traditionalist, a guy obsessed with the Fire Nation and the way it should be, he says, you half-breed brat, how could you generate lightning? And this is where Mako gets to have his big moment here in front of Ponzo. Ponzo's in the rubble, and he just says, "You are nothing but a pale imitation of what the Fire Nation used to be. And you're no warlord, you're just a pathetic relic of a bygone era. Your time is over." So basically, he arrests him and arrests some of the main people that are helping him as well. In the aftermath of this, we basically get Hisa stepping up effectively to become sort of the new leader of Penquan Island, revealing the truth to everyone and realizing that, like, he basically has been killing our people, sacrificing our children's futures because of, as she words it, his deranged nostalgia for what the Fire Nation should be. We need to progress like the rest of the Fire Nation has progressed. We can't be stagnant anymore. And her plea here effectively earns her the respect of the rest of the people. She uses her firebending in front of everyone, which is this shocking act on the island to see a woman firebending. But she says and gets them all on board with her as well. She is supported, of course, by now kind of her kids, Jian, Kibi, and Ming Ming. And the idea is that Penquan will take time to change, but it seems like most of the people are ready. And there's a nice scene of Haijun, who's of course seen how lost, I suppose, his island has been, and he sees kind of hope for the future, even though it will take time. So there's some nice stuff they do with a lot of the side characters here, where it's not just completely random, like one-off characters. There's some depth here, I do think. Then we get the reveal on what did he mean when he said that, like, if she had stayed hidden, she might have lived. We find out that Naoki actually, after settling herself, basically assisted Haijun from that point on with helping people to settle when he brought them to the city. She assisted people with getting jobs when they came to the city, and that must have been how she, like, how word of her being in Republic City got back to him, which ultimately kind of got her killed. With the idea being that if she had just maybe relocated herself, focused entirely on herself, maybe he might not have ever found out about that overall. It's very much framed as, this idea she paid a terrible price for her kindness, and highlighting the risk of a lot of the people who were involved in relocating people from the island overall. He does point out to the boys that I'm just grateful she got to live her dream, at least for a little while. She wanted nothing more than to have a family of her own. You boys gave her that. Last time I saw her, she bragged about you both something fierce. She wanted you two to have a better childhood than the one she'd had on Penquan. I know things didn't work out like she'd hoped, but seeing the men you've become, she'd be so proud. And this is where they show us the insert image, brand new image of Naoki with the two boys when they're much younger. So age-wise here, what way to view this? Bolin is maybe like 2, 3 at a stretch, I guess, which I guess would make Mako like, 5 or something like that. It's probably something like that. It might be 4 and 6 or in or around that. It's a really nice piece of art, and kind of highlights that, I want to know more about Naoki. I wish this book had maybe focused in a little bit more. We had at least maybe another piece of art with her, but it's super nice what is presented here. We do get the reveal of, does she have any relatives on the island? And the answer is no. She was an only child, and her parents passed before she fled to the city. And Haijun points out that I think her being alone is what finally drove her to leave. That's when she had no family left on the island. The island itself offered very little for her with how it was being run, and that's what caused her to leave, because they highlight she always wanted a family. So, interesting stuff. I think it's nice enough. There's some detail here that I think is pretty nicely done. And then the final 2 pages is just kind of the brothers kind of walking off. They kind of thank each other. There's a big kind of ending to all of this. Right now I'm not a detective. I didn't crack the case. I'm just your brother. And they walk off kind of into the sunset here, kind of to make their way home. The ending is quite sudden. I would have liked to have seen them go back to Republic City and have some sort of reaction. Like I said, I think it almost needed the Mako goes back to the police station and approaches dealing with maybe the other officers in a slightly different way, just to highlight that, you know, this final maybe mystery of his past finally being revealed means he's going to be maybe a little bit more open or something like that going forward. So that's the kind of the book there. It's an interesting one because I think, unlike some of the other one-shot comics, it's maybe not as character-driven as a typical one-shot you maybe expect it to be. This one is more of, it's a plot. It's an investigation that happens. So a lot of it is classic Mako being Mako, but without the what's felt like in previous, maybe some of the previous comics, and like him especially in book 3 and 4, the obsessive need for the writers to highlight like Mako in a relationship, look at that relationship drama stuff. Here it's just, no, it's him and his brother. There's a little bit of like dynamic there, reflecting on his past and how good of a detective he is gets highlighted here. Again, we probably do have to come back to that format issue that I sort of talked about. It's still very good. I still would give the book a pretty high rating, like, you know, an 8.5 or something like that. But I think it is hindered a little bit from reaching the absolute peak of what I think a one-shot comic can be, just because there maybe isn't enough time to maybe have the most concrete character arc for Mako, for Bolin. There maybe isn't as much time as I would have liked to explore this island in the level of detail I would want. The villain who ends up being the one who basically had their mother killed, I think I wanted a bit more time, page count, than just like the final bit of this book. What's here is good, and I don't want to overly review the book on the basis of like what it could have been rather than what it actually is, but I think kind of maybe a little bit of untapped potential is a criticism I think that is quite valid with this book. But overall, I'm pretty pleased with it because it's 72 pages of stunning art. As Kiku Hughes' first big full-length comic, I'm very interested to see how she goes on potential future books involving some of the other characters. Because, of course, immediately people are going to ask, like, is Korra and Asami in the book? They are in it for like 2 panels. They wave goodbye to the brothers when they go off on the boat to the island. But they are just there to, you know, it's a little bit of a cameo appearance. Again, if they had a subplot with Asami and Korra, it would have got no page count, and it would have taken away from some of the stuff going on with Mako, where there's already a bit of a problem there with that. It's like, it's a one-shot comic. I think I was happy that we did even get to see Korra and Asami here and just give you that teaser of, here's Alexandria Monique doing Korra and Asami, which is quite nice. They highlight that, you know, they're so kind to look after Pabu for us. So you can see, I think, Pabu on Korra's shoulder as the two of them are kind of like side by side waving at them goodbye. And then the second panel they're in is just, it's just way further back, like they're barely in it. So it's really like 1 and a bit panels type thing for those two. And then really none of the other kind of characters of note are here, again for the exact same reasons. They're not loading these books up with cameos, but this one made sense that the brothers are potentially going to be gone to this island for who knows how long. Of course they're going to say goodbye to their close friends, of course. So yeah, I'm excited to discuss this book a little bit more. This is my spoiler review, but I will be doing other discussions on this. So myself and Greg will be doing a review on the next Avatar Online podcast. Have to schedule it, but it's either going to be the weekend the book releases, or maybe the week or 2 afterwards. I'll also be doing a live stream like I have done for the last bunch of comic releases. Live stream kind of spoiler discussion as well, where we could be more open and kind of do something similar to this, just with the chat there as well, and more kind of free form, that sort of thing. So yeah, it makes me excited for Korra comics because they've started off the one shots on a pretty good note. I'm very eager to see what the character choice is for the next 2. Obviously, we're only going to find out who the immediate next one is, I guess, at some point over the next couple of months. Asami, I think, makes the most sense. I think most people, I think, have been pretty clear on that. Because I think they definitely gave Mako the first one here because he was in kind of dire need of it. He had not been in any of the short story stuff that had come out. He wasn't in Patterns in Time. Whereas Bolin, at least, had kind of been in some of those as well. And with Mako, like, everything had been about kind of getting him past the Korra and Asami like awkwardness, and so something like this is just needed to sort of a book where we basically are not really acknowledging that weird romance stuff with Mako, and he can kind of just get back to normal with him, was absolutely needed. But after Mako, I think Asami definitely is the character who needs it most. I think people just would like to see a book that allows Asami quite a bit of screen time, and maybe features a bit more Korra Asami as well. But also, like, I think it's important with maybe the Asami book to maybe not over focus it on like Asami and Korra. Like, use it to highlight Asami as a character who, that's what is really needed, is her as an individual. By all means, highlight the relationship as well, but like I do think Asami herself needs some of that focus that she maybe didn't get in more recent stuff, especially some of the earlier comics where it was more of a set up a situation where Korra has to save her. It'd be nice to have something a bit different happen with Asami. Other than that, because they do them in trilogies, the third character is a little bit more difficult to predict. I'm assuming Bolin is considered to be basically done, in that I don't think he should get one of the three here. Just because he's significantly enough in this where, like, it's clearly Mako's comic, but like he's in this enough to where it'd be weird if he also got his own one-shot comic. I also think he's relatively well developed otherwise, so I'm kind of thinking, like, do you do Tenzin? Do you do maybe a Jinora? Someone like that, and you have the collection be like Mako, Asami, Jinora? Maybe. Maybe they do Mako and Bolin in this one, and then maybe Korra and Asami, because I think potentially the idea of a Korra one-shot is maybe not as out of the picture as you might think, just because there's so much going on in the kind of Korra era, where actually just giving the main character her own book might not be the worst thing for this first trilogy. But I'm guessing they will start off without doing one for Korra, and Korra will just appear when required. So excited to see the reveals on that whenever it's actually going to be. Again, the marketing points from some of the press release stuff that came out along with the Seven Havens announcement did include stuff like that, where like Dark Horse are going to be announcing, like I said, the mini-series, the hardcover book, which we assume is Beast of the Four Nations, finally happening. And then they mentioned the ongoing series, which I guess would be Avatar and Korra one-shots continuing. So we need to see the announcement there. At the very least, it is probably at least 5 or 6 months from now, assuming the announcement maybe happens soon. If it doesn't happen soon, it would still be 5 or 6 months at least from whenever the announcement actually does happen. So there's still a chance for it this year, absolutely. But I'm eager to see when they do that, because of how much delays there were on this first one. It means I think it's just borderline impossible to predict where we're at with the second one. And with regards to like some of the production issues, I'm like, is it the same creative team continuing on? I'm not even sure that that's necessarily 100% locked in, though I don't think there's been any direct evidence to say that, other than it feels a bit weird kind of what has and hasn't happened with this book. But yeah, I'm going to wrap it up there. The book obviously now out. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on it. How do you think the launch of Korra one-shots compares to Avatar? In general, what were your thoughts on this as a Mako comic, as just a one-shot comic on its own? And especially kind of what my main kind of maybe criticism or point was throughout this video of how do you think this book handled the format? 72 pages. Did you feel you wanted more coming out of this, or what? Let me know. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.